Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ta'ala, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So thank you for having me here today, and I'm going to be speaking to you about love in the time of oppression. So when I was invited to speak here, I knew immediately that I wanted to speak about love, and I wanted to speak about love in the context of the first name that came to my mind, which was the name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I really wanted to talk about it in the context of what love actually means in our society. So when you heard the title, I don't know whether the question popped into your mind, what does love have to do with oppression? So as was mentioned earlier, I am a writer and a blogger, so stories are kind of my bread and butter. So I thought in the short time that I have with you, I'm gonna walk you through a short story that I find really powerful. So this is a story about a time in our Prophet Muhammad Muhammad's life when he was going through a lot of hardship. So he had been given this message, and 11 years later, he's still being persecuted in Mecca. And in the face of this, he decides to leave the city and go to another city, Taif, to seek refuge, right? So the Prophet ﷺ embarks on this journey, and he has to walk around 3 miles, I think, which to put into context is hours. I don't know if a lot of people do exercise here, but 30 minutes, and I'm like half puff. I can't move anymore. And he has to do this walk to Taif to speak to their leaders in a way to seek refuge and to see if they can offer him protection. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, arrives at Taif, and he spends 10 days trying to speak to the leaders of this community. So you can imagine, like day 1, he's trying to get an appointment, and it's like, no, you have to come back. Day 2, the same thing. Day 3, the same thing. And eventually, he's able to speak to these leaders, so 3 of them. And one after each other, they dismiss him. So you can imagine, like someone comes to you and you're like, no, actually, I don't want to hear that message. It's not for me. And in the midst of that, so he spent 10 days, and he now has to face the reality that he has to go back home without the refuge and the protection that he's seeking. And this is really the point of the story that I want to highlight, because it wasn't just enough for the people in that community to reject him. They decided when he was leaving to gather children and teenagers to throw rocks and stones at him. So narrations kind of talk about how there's the pathway that Prophet ﷺ has to take to go back to Mecca is about over a mile long, right? And throughout this journey, with each and every single step, they are throwing rocks and they are throwing stones at the Prophet ﷺ. And it's mentioned that he's bleeding so much all over his body and all over his feet that his feet sort of like sticks to the sandals because of how much he's bleeding. And so I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the Prophet in this moment, right? The Prophet is over 50 years, I think, at this point in time. And he's come to this city with good intentions to spread the message of Islam. And he's now leaving with his body covered in blood, with his feet soaked in blood as well. And I want you to think about a moment in your life where you've ever felt humiliated, or you've ever felt embarrassed, or you've ever felt ashamed. What was the emotion that was going through your mind? Were you angry? Were you hurt? Were you seeking retaliation? Like, I want you guys to walk in the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ. Because what the Prophet ﷺ does in this moment as he leaves the city, I think is one of the most incredible feats that we have as Muslims. So I'm going to read the dua to you guys. So the Prophet ﷺ raises his hand and he says, "O Almighty, I raise unto you my complaint for my weakness, my helplessness, and for the ridicule to which I have been subjected. O merciful, you are the master of all oppressed people. You are my God, so to whom would you consign me? To the strangers who would ill-treat me, or to the enemies who have an upper hand over me? If whatever has befallen me is not because of your wrath, then I fear not. No doubt the field of your security and care is wide enough for me. I seek refuge in your light, which illuminates the darkness and straightens the affair of this world and hereafter, that your displeasure and wrath may not descend upon me. For the sake of your pleasure, I remain pleased and resigned to my faith. No change in this world occurs without your will." So the dua that the Prophet ﷺ makes, actually, it's a complaint to Allah, but not about his pain, but about his weakness. That the Prophet ﷺ in this moment isn't making dua that, oh Allah, punish them for what they've done to me. The Prophet ﷺ is making dua for mercy, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him the tools that he needs to complete this mission. And the Prophet ﷺ is praying for forgiveness for these people. So why did I want to share this story in answer the question, what does love have to do with oppression? So when I was thinking about the title, I thought about the parallels that this story now has to our lives. That we as Muslims in the West, we are living in a time that, you know, the scope of it is changing. If you think about the European elections that we just had and the amount of far-right politicians that just got elected, that we are living in a time whereby it's not just that people are rejecting the message that we are presenting to them, it's now escalating to a point where it is about messages of humiliation, messages of insult, and then beyond that, taking another step further, is also about the threat of violence. So when we speak about Islamophobia, some of us might know people who have been affected by Islamophobia tangibly, or at the very least, the fact that for some of us, wearing hijab outside comes with anxiety, and that we are fearful. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this was because when I thought about just the scope of the world and everything that's going on, whether it relates to Muslims or non-Muslims, I thought about how easy it can become in our pursuit of justice for our hearts to become hard, right? For our motivations in the pursuit of justice to be motivated by hate and anger and not love and mercy. And I thought about the precedent that the Prophet ﷺ has established for us, because he describes this day as one of the most difficult days of his life when he's having a conversation with Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. And I thought about how important it was for us to follow in his footsteps, that when we are in the midst of oppression, that the tool that we call upon first of all is dua, and that in the midst of it also, that we make sure that our experiences are not hardening our hearts, but they are softening our hearts. So the second point that I also want to leave you guys with is just about the importance of us leaning more towards the seerah. So as I mentioned earlier, I write. So as a result of that, I read a lot. And I think it was recently that I just thought to myself, it's a little bit crazy that I read a lot of books about a lot of people, but I didn't think to myself that I was learning enough about the Prophet ﷺ. And I think the important thing that I want to leave you guys with is how incredible his life can be in giving us solace and hope in a time where things can look bleak, in a times where we might not see the results that we want, and making sure that we rely on that. And I think just that as this month is wrapping up, that we make a commitment to love, because learning about his life and implementing that and sharing his story with people, because ultimately the Prophet ﷺ is our roadmap to earning the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That as you know, we wrap up this blessed month, that the commitment that we make to bettering ourselves afterwards is also through learning more about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So thank you, Jazakallah khair, for giving me the time and the space to speak with you all today. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts our fast. Amin ya Rabbal Alameen.